And with school being out, many families are heading to the beaches and swimming pools. Parents may assume that because their child likes the water, they are safe being around it. As part of National Water Safety Month, the Heart of the Valley YMCA wants to share some water safety tips with parents and caregivers. And people should swim when there is a lifeguard on duty. You should never swim alone. Adults should constantly and actively watch their children. Inexperienced or non-swimmers should wear a Coast Guard approved life jacket, and no one should be engaging in breath-holding activities. The Heart of the Valley YMCA also offers swim lessons. For more information, visit rocketcitynow.com.